My 32nd birthday landed on our corporate anniversary. In the middle of the Northbridge Freightworks glass lobby, my stepmother, Renee Vale, punched me squarely in the cheekbone. Dozens of employees were filming for their stories. I didn't cry. I just glanced at my watch. It was 3:17 p.m., the precise moment the morals clause in her board charter automatically triggered. My name is Mara Ellison. I am 32 years old, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Northbridge Freightworks. The grand lobby of our Grayford headquarters was designed to intimidate. Soaring ceilings of glass and steel arched over a polished marble floor that reflected everything like a dark, cold lake. Today, it reflected a party. Blue and silver LED lights pulsed gently across the cavernous space, catching the silver frosting on a massive sheet cake that read, "Happy 50th Anniversary, Northbridge," and in smaller script below, "Happy Birthday, Mara." The air smelled of sugar and corporate air freshener, a sterile sweetness. I was standing near the cake, accepting a glass of champagne from a junior analyst. When the blow landed, it wasn't a slap, it was a punch. A closed fist, calculated impact delivered by a perfectly manicured hand. The force of it snapped my head to the side, and a universe of white-hot stars exploded behind my left eye. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers and shattered on the marble, a sound that was instantly swallowed by the collective gasp of 200 employees. I tasted blood, a sharp, metallic tang against my teeth. My cheekbones screamed, a deep, resonant ache that was already beginning to throb in time with my pulse. I didn't fall. I straightened up slowly, turning my head to face her. Renee Vale, the chairwoman of the board, my stepmother, stood before me. Her face, usually a mask of serene, boardroom control, was twisted with a fury so pure it was almost beautiful. Her knuckles were white. Her designer blazer hadn't even wrinkled. Around us, the party had frozen. Then, predictably, the phones came up, a sea of glowing rectangles, all pointing at us, all recording. The soft red light of a live stream blinked in my peripheral vision. Good. "Keep the cameras exactly where they are," I said. My voice was low, but in the sudden, dead silence of the lobby, it carried like a command shouted through a megaphone. I saw a few people flinch, but no phones were lowered. Two of our uniformed security officers, Marcus and Dave, started moving toward us from the main entrance, their expressions a mixture of panic and confusion. They were used to dealing with disgruntled truckers, not the chairwoman assaulting the COO. Their training manuals didn't have a chapter for this. "Marcus," I said, my eyes still locked on Renee. "SOP 12. He stopped, his brow furrowed. "Ma'am?" "Standard operating procedure. Section 12, I clarified, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Hostile incident involving executive personnel. Lock the immediate area. No one in or out. Begin taking witness statements. I want digitally signed affidavits from everyone in this 30-foot radius." His training kicked in, his posture straightened. "Yes, ma'am," he spoke into his shoulder mic, his voice now firm and official. "Code 7, main lobby, initiate SOP 12 lockdown." The other officer began directing the stunned employees to form a line, pulling out a company-issued tablet. I took a pristine white napkin from a nearby table and pressed it to my split lip. It came away stained a bright, vivid crimson. I didn't look away from Renee, whose breathing was now ragged, her chest rising and falling beneath her silk blouse. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the dawning horror of realization. "Get our on-site medic over here now," I instructed Marcus. "I need a full examination of the injury, high-resolution photographs for the record, and a formal report logged into the EHS system. I want it time-stamped. Every entry." "Right away, Ms. Ellison." While the gears of corporate procedure began to grind around us, I pulled out my own phone. My fingers were steady as I navigated to the internal compliance application, a program I had personally overseen the development of. I created a new incident report. The drop-down menus were simple. Category: workplace violence. Subcategory: physical assault. I tagged Renee Vale as the instigator and myself as the victim. I attached a placeholder for the forthcoming medical report and the security files. Then, I selected the notification list. The system automatically included human resources and the head of security. I manually added 2 more names, Delia Sloan and Arthur Finch, the 2 most powerful independent members of the board of directors. I hit submit. The system confirmed the report was logged and alerts had been sent. A process was now in motion that not even Renee could stop. Her composure finally cracked, the mask shattered, revealing the raw, ugly rage beneath. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was louder than any shout. "You ungrateful little brat, I will destroy you for this." I met her gaze, my own expression unreadable. I felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of finality. "Have your counsel present at 5 p.m., I replied calmly. "We'll be convening an emergency session in the main boardroom." I glanced at the large digital clock on the lobby wall. 3:21 p.m., right on schedule. On my phone, a new email notification popped up. The subject line written in stark, automated text. Ethics violation alert. Morals clause triggered. A copy was automatically sent to the entire oversight committee and the company's general counsel. It was a direct result of the zero tolerance violence addendum I had pushed through last year's charter review, a clause everyone had skimmed. Assuming it was just boilerplate legalese, it wasn't. I did not leave the marble floor. I stood there, a silent, bleeding monument to process, as the on-site medic, a flustered woman named Carol, gently cleaned my face and took her pictures, her hands shaking slightly. I watched as employees, one by one, gave their statements to the security team, their hushed voices describing the punch they had all witnessed. I made sure every digital signature was captured, every statement uploaded to the incident file before the witness was allowed to leave the cordoned-off area. The scene was no longer a party. It was a meticulously documented crime scene. When Carol was finished, she handed me the bloodied napkin. I didn't throw it away. I walked over to Marcus, who now had a portable evidence kit. "Bag this," I said, holding out the napkin. "I want a full chain of custody log initiated. Label it Exhibit A." He looked at the bloody tissue, then at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He took it with a pair of sterile tweezers, placed it in a tamper-proof plastic bag, and sealed it. He scanned the bag's barcode with his tablet, and a new entry appeared in the digital log, documenting the time, date, location, and the handler. It was official. It was irrefutable. It was a birthday gift, wrapped in procedure and sealed with blood. My blood. As the medic dabbed antiseptic on my lip, the sting felt distant, a minor footnote to the thrumming ache in my cheekbone. The pain was a grounding force, a physical anchor in the storm of procedure I had unleashed. In it, I could almost feel the echoes of a different history, the one that led us precisely to this moment on the cold marble floor. My father, Colin Ellison, built Northbridge Freight Works with grease on his hands and diesel in his veins. He started with one truck and a belief that a promise made should be a promise kept on time. He loved 2 things in this world with that same fierce, uncomplicated loyalty: his company and my mother. When my mother died, the light in him dimmed. Into that void stepped Renee. She was a corporate lawyer he'd met at a conference, all sharp angles, sharper smiles, and a voice that could soothe anxious investors over the phone. He married her a year later, believing he was bringing a partner into his life, not a predator. Renee's first project was rebranding, not the company's logo, but its soul. She transformed Northbridge into a model family business for the glossy pages of business magazines. We posed for photos in the boardroom, a tableau of dynastic succession. Colin, the grizzled founder, Renee, the elegant, savvy matriarch, and me, the daughter, groomed to inherit the legacy. It was a beautiful lie. At home, the Ellison household became a place of locked doors. The file cabinet in my father's study, which I used to browse freely, was suddenly fitted with a new, formidable lock. Conversations about company futures stopped when I entered a room. Renee's mantra was protecting the family, but what she meant was protecting her position within it. Our home life became as sterile and controlled as a corporate press release. I didn't fight her, not then. I started where my father did, in the yards. I took a job in the warehouse, the midnight shift, learning the rhythms of the loading docks, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the language of the drivers. I didn't use my name. I was just Mara, and I listened. I learned the routes, the dead-end miles, the inefficient turnarounds. 6 months in, I submitted an anonymous proposal to overhaul the nocturnal logistics network. It detailed a rerouting plan using predictive analytics for traffic and weather, promising to cut fuel consumption. It worked. We saved 12% on fuel costs within the first quarter. When the COO hunted down the author of the plan, he found me, covered in dust, on a forklift. That was how I earned my first promotion. Renee hated it, at a dinner with investors. She patted my hand and called me her stubborn grease monkey girl, a charming little anecdote. Later that night, I overheard her in the hallway, on the phone with one of her board allies. "She has his mind for numbers," she'd said, her voice laced with something that sounded like acid. "But none of the decorum. It's a problem we'll have to manage." The next month, she presented my fuel-saving initiative to the board as a joint project she had mentored me through. The slides were mine. The credit was hers. The day my father died of a sudden heart attack, the world tilted on its axis. We buried him on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, Renee convened the board. She produced a recently amended copy of the corporate charter, a change my father had signed in his final weeks, likely convinced it was a minor tax provision. It established a golden share, a single, non-transferable Class A stock held by the chairman. This share granted its holder 3 times the voting power of all other shares combined, effectively giving them absolute control. It was designed, she explained to a stunned room, to ensure stability during a period of transition. And as my father's surviving spouse and the current vice chair, she was the natural successor. She took his seat at the head of the table without a single dissenting vote. I remained silent. I grieved my father, but I channeled that grief not into tears, but into study. I became an archaeologist of our corporate governance, digging through layers of bylaws, amendments, and procedural manuals. I learned every loophole, every ambiguity. I cross-referenced our workplace violence policies with state labor laws. I mapped out the opaque network of consultants and agencies funded by her personal PR budget, a financial black hole no one ever dared to question. I noticed how the key performance indicators for executive bonuses were structured, how they could be manipulated with shipment redating. I became a collector of her indiscretions. Her assistant, a young, terrified man named Leo, often took her calls on speakerphone in his cubicle next to my office. I started a recording app on my phone whenever I heard her voice raised. I captured her joking about having a problematic shift supervisor transferred to our Alaskan depot to count snowflakes. I recorded her instructing Leo to bury that safety complaint from Dock 6 under a mountain of paperwork. Each recording was encrypted, dated, and stored. Every time she belittled me in a meeting, cut me off mid-sentence, or took credit for my work, I didn't react. I went back to my office, opened a single, password-protected spreadsheet, and made a new entry. Column A was the date. Column B was the transgression. Column C had only 2 words. Next time. That spreadsheet was my Bible, my testament, my promise to myself. Last year, I made my move. After a minor forklift collision on Dock 6, the same one from the safety complaint she'd buried, I proposed a comprehensive review of the company's safety and ethics charter. I presented it as a necessary measure to protect us from litigation and improve our insurance rating. Renee, eager to appear proactive, championed the initiative. The board passed it unanimously. It was a 90-page document full of dense, tedious legalese about OSHA compliance and HR protocols. No one, not Renee, not her lawyers, read it all. They certainly didn't read Appendix 14. Appendix 14 was titled, Executive Conduct and Shareholder Security. It was a single paragraph I had drafted myself, vetted by an outside counsel I paid for out of my own pocket. It stated that in the event of a publicly verifiable act of physical violence perpetrated by a golden shareholder against any employee, that golden share would be rendered inert, its triple voting power nullified, for a period of 30 days, pending a full ethics review by the independent board members. The conditions for verification were strict and immediate: video evidence, a formal medical report, and sworn statements from no fewer than 3 witnesses. The punch she threw at 3:17 p.m. wasn't an act of impulse. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock I had spent 5 years building. She thought she was putting me in my place. In reality, she was walking into a cell of her own making. The foundation of my plan wasn't emotion. It was paperwork. The most powerful weapon in a corporation isn't a fist. It's a clause buried in a document no one has the patience to read. The genesis of my weapon, Appendix 14, was a forklift accident on Dock 6. A driver, exhausted from a double shift, had clipped a racking system, spilling 2 tons of electronics onto the concrete floor. The resulting injury claim and inventory loss cost the company $250,000. More importantly, it gave me the perfect excuse. In the subsequent safety review meeting, I presented a proposal not as the COO, but as a risk manager. I spoke of liability, insurance premiums, and the looming threat of OSHA fines. We need to standardize our safety and ethics protocols across the board, I argued, my voice a carefully calibrated monotone. From the loading dock to the boardroom, our policies must be uniform and our response immediate. It's about protecting the company. Renee, seeing an opportunity to champion a corporate responsibility initiative that cost her nothing, readily agreed. My proposal, a 90-page document titled Northbridge Unified Safety and Conduct Charter, was sent to legal for review. It was designed to be profoundly boring. Tucked away on page 87 was Appendix 14, Executive Morals and Safety Clause. It was a masterpiece of legal obfuscation. Wrapped in the language of fiduciary duty, the clause itself was a simple, brutal equation. It stipulated that a specific set of conditions, when met in sequence, would trigger a non-discretionary corporate action. The conditions were: 1. A verifiable act of physical assault committed by a holder of a Class A golden share. 2. Irrefutable evidence in the form of time-stamped video recording. 3. A formal medical report from on-site or certified medical personnel documenting the assault. And 4. Sworn, digitally signed statements from a minimum of 3 eyewitnesses. If this equation was satisfied, the consequence was automatic and severe. The voting rights of the golden share would be immediately suspended for a 30-day cooling-off and review period. During this suspension, the authority to call votes and direct board proceedings would be temporarily transferred to the Independent Directors Committee. The clause didn't remove Renee from power permanently. That would have been too aggressive and would have faced legal challenges. It simply took away her supervote, her unbreakable shield, and made her an equal at the table, just long enough for the rest of the board to see what she was. Of course, getting the clause into the charter was only the first step. I needed to ensure it would have allies when activated. Northbridge wasn't just owned by the Ellison family. 18% of our stock was held by 3 smaller, private equity funds who had invested early on. They were minority shareholders, largely content to collect dividends and let Renee run the show. But they were nervous about her increasingly autocratic style. Over a series of discreet lunches and late-night calls, I laid out my case to their fund managers. I never mentioned Renee by name. I spoke in hypotheticals. I framed Appendix 14 as a shareholder protection mechanism, a modern governance tool to safeguard their investment against executive overreach or unpredictable behavior. It was, I explained, a safety valve to prevent one person's personal failing from destroying the company's reputation and stock value. They saw the logic. A leader who could physically assault an employee in public was a liability they couldn't afford. They quietly gave me their assurance they would support the clause's enforcement if it ever came to it. With the legal and political groundwork laid, I turned to the physical stage. 3 months before my birthday, I submitted a capital expenditure request for a lobby security enhancement. The request detailed the need to upgrade our aging CCTV system and cover several identified blind spots. It was a mundane request, easily approved by the head of security, a man who reported directly to me. The new cameras were state-of-the-art, high definition, and cloud-based. One was positioned above the main entrance, another gave a wide shot from the reception desk, and the third, the crucial one, was a small dome camera nestled in the ceiling directly above the spot where the anniversary cake would be displayed. Next, I addressed the human element. I personally oversaw a new training module for the reception and lobby security teams. It was called the Incident Scene Integrity Protocol, or, as I had called it to Marcus, SOP 12. We ran drills for everything from a medical emergency to a suspicious package. The core principle was always the same. In the event of any unscheduled incident, their first job was to secure the area, prevent contamination of the scene, and begin documenting. They were trained to act immediately and to disregard the rank or title of anyone involved. An incident was an incident. The protocol was the protocol. This removed any hesitation they might have had in acting against the chairwoman of the board. They weren't defying her. They were following my orders, following procedure. Preparation, for me, is about eliminating variables. Weeks before the party, I drafted the emails. One was addressed to the full board of directors. Its subject line a stark, urgent, notification of morals and safety clause activation. The body was a template, with fields for date, time, and incident number. It formally notified them of the event and the immediate suspension of the Golden Shares voting rights as per Appendix 14. The second email was for Mercer & Cole, our auditing firm, informing them of a high-level ethics breach and placing them on standby for a potential forensic audit. These drafts sat in my Send Later folder, silent and waiting. I lived by the doctrine of redundancy. Every piece of my research, the notes from my calls with the equity funds, the original draft of Appendix 14 vetted by my private lawyer, the audio recordings of Renee's abusive phone calls, was duplicated. One set was stored on the company's encrypted share vault system, under a project file disguised as a logistics analysis. The other was on a hardened solid-state drive locked in a safe deposit box at a downtown bank. A location Renee didn't even know existed. If she tried to wipe the company servers, the evidence would survive. The final piece was the witness. A collection of employee statements was good, but the testimony of a fellow board member was unassailable. I personally invited Delia Sloan to the celebration. Delia was the lead independent director, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had built her own tech empire before retiring to a portfolio of board seats. She valued stability and good governance above all else. My invitation was casual. Delia, we're celebrating 50 years, and it's my birthday. I'd be honored if you could stop by for a glass of champagne. She accepted, unaware she was not attending a party, but serving as a witness for the prosecution. And then there was the time, 3:17 p.m. It was not a random number. Our company's IT infrastructure runs on a continuous logging system that archives data in hourly blocks. However, I had instructed the IT security team, under the guise of preparing for a system-wide stress test, to implement a micro-partition of the server logs at exactly 3:17 p.m. on the day of the anniversary. This meant that every digital action recorded after that precise second, the incident report I filed, the security footage upload, the email alerts, would be written to a brand new, cryptographically sealed log file. It would create an inviolable digital timeline, making it impossible for Renee's lawyers to later claim that we had manipulated the evidence or altered the timestamps after the fact. The punch at 3:17 p.m. wasn't just an event. It was the first entry in a fresh, clean, and damning ledger. While the lobby was being sanitized back into a state of corporate normalcy, I was in my office on the 14th floor. The door was locked. The throbbing in my cheek had subsided into a dull, persistent ache, a physical reminder of the timetable. I wasn't pacing. I wasn't celebrating. I was working, For me, this day, my 32nd birthday, was never about the cake or the meaningless applause. It was a deadline, a statute of limitations on my silence. Sitting on the small stage in the lobby, overlooked in the immediate aftermath of the assault, was a box. It was a perfect cube wrapped in silver paper, tied with a dark blue ribbon, the Northbridge corporate colors. Affixed to the top was a simple, laser-printed card that read, "For Renee, open at 5 p.m." To any casual observer, it looked like a thoughtful birthday gesture, perhaps a peace offering or a token of familial duty. Renee, I knew, would see it as a child's pathetic attempt at theatricality, a final, desperate plea for attention. She was wrong. It wasn't a plea. It was a formal declaration of war, packaged as a party favor. The contents of that box were not sentimental. They were procedural. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were 3 items, a triptych of her undoing. The first was a small, brushed metal USB drive. It was unbranded, sterile. On it, I had compiled a single, self-executing presentation file. The file began with the video footage of her assault, compiled from all 3 new lobby cameras, synced into a single, seamless narrative. It showed the punch from 3 different angles, the shock on the employees' faces, my head snapping back. It was clear, high definition, and undeniable. Following the video was a series of digital folders containing the scanned, digitally signed witness statements from every employee security had interviewed. Next was the full medical report from our on-site medic, complete with high-resolution photographs of my split lip and the rapidly forming bruise on my cheekbone. The final folder contained the complete, unalterable system logs from 3:17 p.m. onward, showing the exact moment I filed the compliance report, and the automated ethics alerts were dispatched to the board. It was not a story. It was a data stream, a sequence of irrefutable time-stamped facts that fulfilled every condition of Appendix 14. The second item was a letter. It was the only personal object in the box, and it wasn't for her. It was a letter my father had written to me on my 21st birthday, shortly after I started working in the warehouse. I had found it tucked into an old copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations he had given me. The envelope was yellowed, my name written on the front in his familiar, broad-nibbed scrawl. The letter was not about love or pride, not in the traditional sense. It was about the company. "Mara," it read, "this place is more than steel and rubber. It's a promise, and a promise is only as strong as the person who keeps it. When my time is done, I want the voting rights, the real control, to pass not to the person with the loudest voice or the sharpest suit, but to the one with the most capable hands, the one who understands that the engine room is more important than the paint job." The letter had no legal standing, but its moral weight was immense. It was my father's voice from the grave, a testament to an intention that Renee had subverted with her golden share. It was meant for Delia Sloan and the other board members. It was meant to make them question who was truly honoring Colin Ellison's legacy. The third and final item was a single sheet of paper. It was a draft of an emergency board resolution. The text was brutally simple. In accordance with the provisions of the Northbridge Unified Safety and Conduct Charter, Appendix 14, and in light of the verifiable evidence of a breach of the Executive Morals and Safety Clause on this date, an immediate vote is hereby called to affirm the temporary suspension of all voting rights associated with the Class A Golden Share, pending a full review by the Independent Directors Committee. It was the paper cut designed to sever the artery. It didn't ask for her removal. It didn't accuse her of fraud. It simply demanded the board follow the rules they themselves had approved. At 4:30 p.m., I placed a call to the internal mailroom. "This is Mara Ellison. I have a priority package, tracking number 77B14, for delivery to the office of the board secretary. It requires a signature and is to be delivered no later than 4:55 p.m. I logged the request into the internal courier system with the same dispassion I would use to ship a spare part to a depot in Ohio. The system automatically generated a confirmation email. I forwarded a copy to Michael Rowan at Rowan & Bright. our primary corporate law firm, with a single line of text. Michael, for your records, please confirm receipt and validity of the cited charter provision. His reply came back in under 2 minutes. Receipt confirmed. Mara, the provision is ironclad. Now the process was witnessed by our own legal counsel. Renee would have been in her office, probably on the phone with her lawyer, strategizing how to frame the punch as a family spat, a moment of emotional distress. She would see my gift box as a nuisance, a petty provocation. She had always seen me as overly dramatic, but ultimately harmless. She mistook my patience for weakness, my silence for submission. She believed power was a blunt instrument, something you use to smash through obstacles. She never understood that true power lies in the intricate, interlocking gears of a system, in the quiet, patient construction of a trap that the target walks into of their own free will. At 4:55 p.m., precisely as scheduled, the courier delivered the silver box to Margaret, the long-serving and impeccably precise secretary to the board. Margaret was a woman who lived by the clock and the corporate manual, and that manual had a very specific protocol for unscheduled packages being delivered to the board immediately before a meeting, a protocol I had helped draft during my last security review. Any such package had to be opened and its contents screened for security purposes before being presented. It was a simple, logical rule. So, 5 minutes before Renee was meant to, Margaret, wearing white cotton gloves as per the protocol, sliced open the box. She didn't find a childish trinket or a sentimental photograph. She found a USB drive, a faded personal letter, and a legal resolution that felt like a declaration of a coup. She laid the contents out on her desk blotter, not as a gift, but as evidence. She looked at the resolution, then at the clock. The emergency meeting was set to begin in 5 minutes. Margaret, a woman whose loyalty was not to any single person but to the institution of the board itself, did not panic. She simply picked up her telephone and dialed the extension for the company's general counsel. The birthday party was over. The hearing was about to begin. The punch was the public execution. The audit was the poison that had been working its way through the system for months. While Renee believed our conflict was one of boardroom theatrics and familial resentment, I knew the battle would be won or lost in the quiet, sterile columns of a spreadsheet. Her power wasn't just in her golden share, it was in the opacity of her operations. My job was to turn on the lights. Parallel to the meticulous construction of the Appendix 14 trap, I had initiated a second, far more discreet operation, a Level 3 internal review of the Northbridge Public Relations and External Affairs Fund. This was Renee's personal kingdom, a multi-million-dollar budget she controlled with absolute autonomy. It was the source of her power, funding the glowing magazine profiles, the lavish networking events, and the loyalty of key media figures. On the books, it was untouchable, but I wasn't looking at the books. I was looking at the receipts. The process began with a single, anomalous data point. A junior analyst in accounts payable, running a routine vendor reconciliation for me, flagged a recurring monthly payment of $75,000 to a consulting firm called Apex Strategic Solutions. The invoice descriptions were laughably vague. Corporate synergy services, reputational asset management. I asked him to dig deeper. Apex Strategic Solutions had no website, no physical address beyond a P&O box in Delaware, and a single director whose name appeared on the incorporation documents of 2 other consulting firms also on our payroll, Zenith Global Outreach and Pinnacle Communications Group. Over the course of a year, these 3 entities had received a combined total of $2.4 million from Renee's PR fund. They were shell companies, digital ghosts created for the sole purpose of siphoning money. But proving that required more than just a suspicious paper trail. I needed to connect the payments to a lack of deliverable services. I needed to prove they were phantoms. I cross-referenced the payment dates with our own logistics database. Northbridge was a freight company. Everything we did, everything we were, was tied to the movement of trucks. Our trucks had GPS. Our manifests were digitized. Our way stations logged every axle. If Renee was claiming these payments were for legitimate services, there had to be a corresponding footprint in our world, however small, a delivery of marketing materials, a visit from a consultant. There was nothing. Then I found the lie. On 17 separate occasions, invoices from Apex, Zenith, or Pinnacle were submitted with an accompanying logistics and courier fee. These fees corresponded with 17 shipments logged in the PR department's internal expense reports, but when I pulled the manifests, the truck license plates listed didn't exist in our company-wide fleet registry. I ran them through a national database. They didn't exist anywhere. They were ghost trucks. The GPS data for the supposed delivery times showed our nearest vehicle hundreds of miles away. It was a closed loop of fraud. Fake companies submitting fake invoices for services rendered by fake trucks. The communication logs were the final piece. I had our IT security team, under the pretext of a phishing vulnerability scan, run a keyword search on the archived emails of Renee's assistant, Leo. I wasn't looking for confessions, just patterns. The pattern I found was a code name, Bird's Nest. In emails to Renee sent minutes before each of the large wire transfers to the shell companies, Leo would write, "The Bird's Nest is ready for funding," or "confirming transfer to the Bird's Nest account." It was their private language for the heist. I didn't package this information as an accusation. Accusations can be debated. Data cannot. I compiled the evidence, the payment records, the shell company incorporation documents, the ghost truck manifests, the keyword-flagged emails, into a concise, 20-page appendix. It was attached to the emergency board resolution in the silver box. I didn't use the words fraud or embezzlement. The title of the appendix was clinical, Review of Potential Level 1 Internal Control Risks in the External Affairs Fund. It was not a story of a crime. It was a dispassionate risk assessment. In the resolution itself, I used the language that the private equity funds on our board were genetically programmed to fear. I stated that these control deficiencies may expose the company to significant financial risk and a potential breach of fiduciary trust, creating the possibility of shareholder liability. That was the real trigger. It transformed the issue from Renee might be stealing to Renee's actions might get us all sued. Self-preservation is the most powerful force in any boardroom. Our corporate counsel, upon reading it, would immediately recognize another, more pressing threat. A company found to be engaged in financial misconduct could have its federal shipping contracts suspended or revoked, a blow that would cripple Northbridge overnight. I expected this evidence to be a slow-acting acid, something that would dissolve her support over the course of the 30-day review period. But then, something unexpected happened. The day before the anniversary party, I received an anonymous, encrypted email. "I know what you're looking for. I can't be the one who goes down for this." It was from Jordan Pike, a mid-level accountant in the finance department, a quiet, overlooked man who processed the payments for Renee's fund. His conscience, or more likely, his terror of a federal prison sentence, had finally won. I met him in a coffee shop miles from the office. He was pale and trembling, clutching a laptop. He confessed he had been creating twin invoices for years, one real one from a legitimate vendor, and a second, fraudulent one for the same amount to one of the shell companies, which Renee would personally approve. He thought it was just creative accounting until the numbers got too big to ignore. He handed me a USB drive containing the original, unaltered accounting files, the digital smoking gun. He also handed me a signed letter of resignation. I refused his resignation. Instead, I initiated the official Northbridge Whistleblower Protection Program, another obscure policy I had helped write. I had him sign a non-disclosure agreement and placed him on paid administrative leave. His record officially transferred to a confidential HR file accessible only by me and the head of legal. I assured him that as long as he told the truth, the corporation would protect him from retaliation. He wasn't a hero, but his fear had just made my case airtight. This financial evidence wasn't the primary weapon. The punch was the simple, brutal act that activated the clause and forced the board into a room. But the audit was the reason they wouldn't be able to leave that room without acting. It changed the entire dynamic. It ensured that any board member who might have been inclined to defend Renee, to dismiss the assault as a personal matter, would now be forced to confront a far greater, more dangerous problem. The punch made them look. The numbers would make them vote. At 5:07 p.m., the members of the Northbridge Freightworks Board of Directors were assembled in the glass room. It was a fitting name, the boardroom, located on the top floor, had 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the city lights beginning to flicker on against the bruised twilight sky. Tonight, the city was just a backdrop. The real drama was inside, reflected in the polished obsidian surface of the long conference table. The air was cold, smelling of ionized air and anxiety. Renee was the last to arrive. She made an entrance, not a walk. Her suit was immaculate, her posture ramrod straight. She had reapplied her makeup, a flawless mask of foundation covering any flush of anger. A faint, thin smile was painted on her lips. She looked every inch the chairwoman, projecting an aura of someone who had just been mildly inconvenienced, not someone who had committed assault an hour and a half ago. She took her seat at the head of the table, nodding coolly to the other members as if this were a routine quarterly review. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice smooth as chilled vodka. "There appears to have been a small misunderstanding in the lobby earlier. I'm sure we can clear it up swiftly." Before she could continue, Margaret, the board secretary, rose silently from her seat by the door. She moved around the table with practiced efficiency, placing a small, brushed metal USB drive and a single, folded letter in its aged envelope at each board member's place. She did this without a word, her expression perfectly neutral. When she placed the items before Renee, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. There was no defiance in Margaret's gaze, only duty. Renee's smile tightened at the edges. Silence descended. The only sound was the low, almost imperceptible hum of the climate control system. No one spoke. No one touched the items. They sat there, small and potent, in front of each director. "Margaret," Renee said, her voice losing a fraction of its warmth, "what is this?" "The contents of the package delivered to my office at 4:55 p.m. Madam Chair," Margaret replied, her voice a quiet, factual statement. As per protocol, they were screened and prepared for the board's review. Delia Sloan, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, was the first to act. She picked up the USB drive, looked at it for a moment, and then inserted it into the port on the table's integrated console. On the massive 8K screen that took up the entire front wall, a file directory appeared. There was only one file. She clicked on it. The screen filled with the bright, cheerful chaos of the anniversary party. Then, the camera angle shifted, a seamless cut to the high-definition view from directly above. We all watched as Renee's hand, perfectly manicured, drew back and struck my face. The sound was sickeningly clear, the sharp crack of knuckles on bone, followed by the collective, horrified gasp of 200 people. The video played on a loop, a silent, 3-angle ballet of violence. Punch, gasp, rewind, punch, gasp, rewind. Renee went pale. It was not a blush of shame, but the bloodless white of pure shock. The mask was gone. She was staring at her own actions, stripped of any narrative she might have been constructing. She was no longer a powerful executive. She was just a woman hitting her stepdaughter in front of a crowd. I let the video play 3 more times before I spoke, my own voice calm and measured. "For the official record," I said, directing my words to Margaret, who was already typing, "I would like the minutes to reflect that at approximately 3:17 p.m., a publicly witnessed act of physical violence was perpetrated by the chairwoman against the chief operating officer. This act is confirmed by multiple video sources and the sworn statements of over 37 employees." "This is absurd," Renee snapped, finding her voice. It was brittle. "It was an accident. A moment of high emotion during a family disagreement. Mara startled me. My hand flew up. It was a reflex." I didn't respond to her. Instead, I nodded to Delia. Delia, in turn, navigated to the next file on the USB drive. The medical report appeared on the screen. The cool clinical text, a stark contrast to the raw violence of the video. "The official medical assessment," Delia said, reading from the report on the screen. Notes: a contusion and laceration consistent with a direct, forceful impact from a closed fist. Presence of microfractures on the zygomatic arch. The pattern of bruising is inconsistent with an accidental or reflexive gesture. A heavy silence filled the room. The men from the private equity funds, who had been watching with stony expressions, exchanged a brief, meaningful glance. Renee's lawyer, seated a pace behind her, leaned forward to whisper in her ear, but Renee waved him off. "This is a family matter being dragged into the boardroom to embarrass me," she insisted, her voice rising. "I'm afraid it is now a boardroom matter," Delia Sloan said quietly but firmly. She closed the medical report and opened a third file. A PDF of the Northbridge Unified Safety and Conduct Charter. She scrolled down to page 87. "I'd like to draw the board's attention to Appendix 14, the Executive Morals and Safety Clause, which this board unanimously ratified 18 months ago." She read the clause aloud, her voice clear and precise, each word landing like a hammer blow. She detailed the conditions: the act of violence, the video evidence, the medical report, the witness statements. "All conditions," she concluded, looking around the table, "appear to have been met. The charter is explicit. The voting rights of the Class A Golden Share are to be suspended for a period of 30 days. The three fund managers nodded in unison, a small, coordinated movement that sealed Renee's fate. They had read the appendix I had sent them. They were prepared. They were no longer just watching a family fight. They were witnessing a clear breach of the corporate governance they had agreed to. I finally looked directly at Renee. The fury in her eyes was a physical force. "I am not asking for your seat, Renee," I said, my voice devoid of triumph. "I am not asking for your resignation. I am simply asking this board to follow its own rules, the resolution before you." I gestured to the single sheet of paper Margaret had distributed. "Does one thing, and one thing only. It calls for a vote to affirm the temporary suspension of your supervote. As mandated by the charter we all operate under, it is a matter of procedure." By framing it as procedure, not punishment, I had given them the out they needed. They weren't choosing me over her. They were choosing order over chaos. "This is a coup," Renee spat, slamming her hand on the table. "No," Delia corrected gently. "This is governance." Delia called the question. All in favor of the resolution as presented. Hands went up, Delia's first, then Arthur Finch, the other independent director, then the three fund managers, one after another. My own hand went up last. 6 in favor. All opposed. Renee's hand shot up, a lone finger of defiance. Abstentions? One of the older directors, a longtime ally of my father's, slowly raised his hand, unable to vote against Renee but unwilling to endorse her actions. "The resolution passes," Delia announced into the ringing silence. 6 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention, effective immediately. The voting rights of the Class A share are suspended. Margaret, please record the time." Margaret looked at the clock on the wall. "The time is 5:24 p.m. The party had been a celebration of a 50-year legacy. Now, the boardroom had become the venue for its first-ever temporary dethronement. My birthday gift had been delivered, right on time. The moment the vote passed was not loud. It was the quietest a room full of powerful people could be. It was the sound of a vacuum being created as Renee's authority. The gravitational force that had warped Northbridge for years was switched off. She sat frozen at the head of the table, her face a mask of disbelief. She was still in the chairwoman's seat, but the chair was now just a piece of furniture. As per the charter's freshly invoked clause, the power to direct the meeting transferred instantly to the Independent Directors Committee. Delia Sloan, as its head, did not miss a beat. She didn't look at Renee. She looked at the rest of the board. "The charter is clear," Delia stated, her voice cutting through the tension. For the next 30 days, this committee will oversee the board's proceedings. Our first order of business is to ensure operational stability and market confidence. The floor is open for proposals on interim leadership. This was my cue. I did not ask for power, I delegated it. I propose we appoint Nora Keats, our Chief Financial Officer, as acting chair of the board. Effective immediately, I said, my voice steady. Nora's long tenure and respected position with our creditors and banking partners will send a clear message of stability. She represents fiscal prudence and institutional continuity. She is the right choice to guide us through this review period. It was a move no one, least of all Renee, expected. I hadn't seized the throne. I had nominated the kingdom's respected treasurer. It was an act of responsibility, not ambition. The fund managers visibly relaxed. Nora, a sharp, apolitical woman in her late 50s, was the safest pair of hands in the company. I will accept this nomination, I continued, before anyone else could speak, under 3 specific and non-negotiable conditions, to be ratified by this board before we adjourn. I held up 3 fingers. 1, that we engage a neutral, third-party forensic accounting firm. I recommend Mercer & Cole, who are already on retainer, to begin a full audit of the Public Relations and External Affairs Fund within the next 48 hours. 2, that the fund itself and all its associated accounts be frozen immediately, with all spending authority revoked pending the outcome of that audit. And 3, that Nora, as acting chair, be given the full and unilateral authority to cooperate with any and all findings. I had tied the stability they craved to the investigation I needed. To get the steady hand of the CFO, they had to agree to open the books. Delia looked around the table. There were no objections. Even Renee's lone ally looked defeated. The logic was unassailable. A vote to appoint Nora Keats as acting chair under the conditions stated, Delia called. All in favor? 7 hands went up, including my own. Renee did not vote. She simply stared at me, the comprehension of how completely she had been outmaneuvered dawning in her eyes. The switch had been thrown. Now, the current would flow. While Delia and the company council began drafting the formal minutes, I opened my laptop. The rest of the process was a cascade of digital directives, a series of commands sent out into the corporate nervous system. My first email was to the head of Human Resources. Subject: Official Directive, No Contact Order. Body: as per the resolution passed by the board at 5:27 p.m., and in light of the documented safety incident, you are hereby directed to activate a formal no-contact order between Renee Vale and Mara Ellison. This order is effective immediately and applies to all company property. Please confirm execution. Confirmation arrived in less than a minute. My second email was a high-priority ticket to the IT security department. Subject: urgent. Executive access modification. Body: per board directive. Immediately revoke all red-level access privileges for Renee Vale's security credentials. Furthermore, change all passwords and suspend all digital wallet access related to Cost Center 7B. External Affairs Fund. Await further instructions from Acting Chair Nora Keats. The system automatically generated a ticket number and assigned it to the on-duty security lead. While typing, I forwarded the board resolution and the attached financial appendix to Michael Rowan at our law firm. My instructions were simple. Michael, please issue litigation hold notices to the 3 vendors listed in the appendix. Standard procedure. This would legally compel Apex, Zenith, and Pinnacle to preserve all records, emails, invoices, phone logs, preventing them from digitally shredding their operations the moment they realized the money tap had been turned off. The final physical act was signing a document that Margaret placed in front of me. It was a system log preservation order, a directive I had the authority to issue as COO. It legally mandated that the IT department impound the physical server racks containing the communication and entry logs for the past 24 hours. They were to be disconnected from the network and placed in a secure third-party facility to prevent any possibility of remote wiping or data alteration. As my pen moved across the paper, creating a binding legal command, My phone buzzed. It was Renee. I let it go to voicemail, but she called back immediately, her name flashing on the screen with an angry insistence. I excused myself from the table and stepped out into the hallway, the city lights glittering behind the glass. I answered, "Yes." Her voice was not the controlled hiss from the boardroom. It was a raw, ragged scream, stripped of all artifice. "You stole my company! My husband's company! You ungrateful little bitch! You planned this!" I stood there, looking out at the sprawling grid of the city my father had helped build. The city his trucks were navigating at this very moment. I felt the dull ache in my cheekbone, a fading echo of her last mistake. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice as calm and quiet as the night sky. "I didn't steal his company. I'm saving it from you." I ended the call before she could reply and blocked her number. Returning to the boardroom, I took my seat and began my final 2 communications of the night. The first was a message broadcast to the entire company through our internal portal. It was deliberately, reassuringly boring. Subject: a message from the COO. To all Northbridge employees. Earlier today, a safety incident occurred at our Grayford headquarters. The situation was addressed immediately and handled in accordance with our established corporate protocols. Northbridge is committed to the safety and security of all its employees. Business operations will continue as normal. Thank you for your continued dedication. No drama, no names, just process, just work. The final communication was an email to the trust that managed our Employee Stock Ownership Plan, ESOP. Our employees owned 22% of the company, and they deserved reassurance. Subject: an update for our employee owners. The board has proactively taken steps to ensure continued stability and responsible governance. CFO Nora Keats has been appointed acting chair to lead during a period of procedural review. This action was taken to protect the company's integrity and long-term value. Your investment and your future here are secure. I hit send. The series of switches was complete. The power had been rerouted. The locks had been changed. The alarms had been set. There would be no panic, no chaos, just the quiet, relentless turning of the gears of a machine that was, once again, working as it was designed. By the time the board meeting adjourned, the lobby had transformed once more. The security cordon was gone. The last of the broken glass swept away. But the remnants of the party remained, looking strangely forlorn in the cavernous space. The evening shift was beginning to arrive, their faces etched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Whispers had already slithered through the company's digital grapevine. They knew something had happened. They didn't know what. I walked down the grand staircase, not to my office, but directly to the small stage that had been set up for the anniversary speeches. "Don't tear it down yet," I instructed a facilities crew member who was preparing to dismantle the podium, and patched the main screen through to my laptop. He looked at me, then at the lingering tension in the air, and simply nodded. Within minutes, the massive video wall behind the stage, which had earlier been displaying a looping slideshow of Northbridge's history, was now a mirror of my screen. A few dozen employees from the night crew, drivers, dispatchers, warehouse sorters, gathered at a respectful distance, their conversations dying down as they watched me. I didn't begin with an explanation. I began with a routine. I clicked a file, and the screen lit up with the familiar blue and silver of a Northbridge corporate training module. The title appeared in bold, sans serif font. Q4 Mandatory Safety Review, Workplace Conduct, and De-escalation. It was bland, official, and utterly expected. For a moment, the tension in the room eased. This was familiar. This was normal. The video played, a generic narrator's voice droning on about situational awareness and reporting protocols over stock footage of smiling, ethnically diverse actors in hard hats. I let it run for exactly 90 seconds. Then, I faded the video to black. The screen held the darkness for a full 5 seconds, a silent, deliberate pause that drew every eye in the room. Then, white text appeared on the black screen, a scanned image of my father's handwriting, magnified 100 times. The camera slowly panned across the words from his letter. the ones that had been my silent mantra for years. The narrator was gone, replaced by the hushed silence of the lobby. This place is more than steel and rubber. It's a promise. When my time is done, I want the voting rights, the real control, to pass not to the person with the loudest voice or the sharpest suit, but to the one with the most capable hands. I stepped up to the podium, the letter's final words still glowing behind me. I looked out at the faces of the night shift, the people who kept the engines running while the executives slept. I did not smile. My voice, when I spoke into the microphone, was not the voice of a victor. It was the voice of a COO reading a memo. As of this afternoon, I began, my tone crisp and formal, we are reaffirming our company's zero-tolerance policy on workplace violence. This is not a new policy. It is a foundational one. It states, and I quote from the charter, any individual, regardless of rank or tenure, who engages in an act of physical aggression against another employee on company property will be subject to immediate and decisive consequences as stipulated by our governing bylaws. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. I was transforming my personal injury into an impersonal case study, a lesson in corporate governance. I was making it about them, about their safety, their right to a workplace free from the caprice of the powerful. As I finished, Delia Sloan emerged from the side of the stage and joined me at the podium. Her presence lent the proceedings an unassailable gravity. She was not family. She was not management. She was the board. Good evening, Delia said, her voice calm and authoritative. As the lead independent director of Northbridge, I am here to confirm the board's commitment to the principles Mara has just outlined. Following a safety incident today, and in accordance with the charter, the board has voted to temporarily suspend the voting rights of the Class A Golden Share. CFO Nora Keats has been unanimously appointed as acting chair to ensure continued operational stability. This is a procedural action, taken to guarantee that this company is, and will always be, governed by its rules, not by impulse. Her statement was short, precise, and devastatingly effective. It was a sterile press release delivered in person. And then, a sound started at the back of the room. It wasn't loud at first, just a smattering of applause from a few of the older drivers, but then it grew, spreading through the dispatchers, the mechanics, the data clerks. It became a wave of solid, sustained applause. They weren't clapping for me. They were clapping for the simple, radical idea that the rules had finally been applied to everyone equally. It was a sound of relief, of a pressure valve being released after years of being tightened. I waited for the applause to die down. Then I walked over to the massive anniversary cake, still largely untouched. I picked up the silver serving knife, cut a large, square piece, and placed it on a plate. I walked off the stage, past the front rows, and made my way to the back of the lobby where the warehouse crew stood awkwardly. I handed the plate to their shift supervisor, a man named Sal, whose hands were permanently stained with grease. You guys have been running double shifts all month to clear the backlog at the port, I said, my voice low enough for only them to hear. Thank you. Sal looked at the cake, then at me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his tired face. Any time, Mara, he said. Good to have you back. It was at that moment, as a quiet murmur of conversation began to fill the room again, that a figure stepped out from the crowd and walked toward the stage. It was Jordan Pike, the accountant. He looked terrified, his face pale, but his steps were determined. He walked up the small set of stairs and stood beside Delia, who looked at him with surprise. He turned to the microphone. My name is Jordan Pike, he said, his voice trembling slightly but carrying through the now silent lobby. I work in finance, for a long time. For too long. I saw things that weren't right. I processed payments that didn't make sense, and I stayed quiet because I was afraid. I just want to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let my fear be bigger than my integrity. He looked like he was about to collapse. I moved quickly back to the stage and stood beside him. I put a hand on his shoulder, a simple, steadying gesture. We don't need to look back, Jordan, I said into the microphone. my voice softer now. We just need to start over, all of us. From behind us, another figure emerged from the shadows near the grand staircase. It was Renee. Her face was a storm cloud of fury. She had obviously come down to confront me, to try and reclaim the narrative, only to walk into the middle of her own public trial. She strode toward the stage, her heels clicking angrily on the marble. She was heading for the second microphone at the other end of the podium. She reached it, her hand grabbing the microphone from its stand. She opened her mouth to speak, to unleash the torrent of rage and denial that was boiling inside her. Nothing happened. The small green active light on the microphone's base remained dark. She tapped it. Still nothing. She looked frantically toward the sound technician, but he just shook his head, pointing at the base. Her red-level security access, the one that gave her automatic priority on all networked systems, including the podium's audiovisual controls, had been revoked by IT security 45 minutes ago. Her keycard no longer carried the authority to activate a microphone. She had been systemically, digitally, and now publicly silenced. She stood there for a long, agonizing moment, a queen without a voice, a ghost at a feast she no longer controlled, then defeated. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows from which she came. No one watched her go. All eyes were on the stage, on the promise of a new beginning. My birthday party had become the most effective corporate ethics seminar in Northbridge history. The justice of a corporation is not swift, but it is brutally efficient. The preliminary findings from Mercer & Cole arrived by encrypted email at 6:15 a.m. the next morning. The language was dry, stripped of all emotion, which made it all the more damning. The auditors confirmed a systemic pattern of invoice duplication and significant disbursement anomalies originating from the External Affairs Fund, tracing $2.4 million to 3 vendors with no verifiable business operations. The report, with Jordan Pike's untouched source files as its Rosetta Stone, was irrefutable. At 8:00 a.m., the Independent Directors Committee convened via a secure video call. The meeting lasted 7 minutes. There was no debate. Armed with the irrefutable evidence of the assault and the preliminary audit, there was nothing left to discuss. Delia Sloan called for a vote on a motion to place Renee Vale on a 90-day non-negotiable administrative suspension pending the full results of the forensic investigation. The motion passed 7-1. The process was cold, clean, and final. I had not attended the meeting. I was busy booking a room. Not the glass room, but a small, interior conference room on the 4th floor, a space with no windows, usually used for mediating low-level supplier disputes. It was anonymous and functional. At 9:30 a.m., I sat at the small table, the room's sterile silence broken only by the hum of the ventilation. In front of me was a single, plain manila envelope. Renee arrived at 9:45 a.m., escorted by a plainclothes security officer who remained outside the door. She looked smaller than she had in the boardroom, stripped of her audience and her power. The fight had gone out of her eyes, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out exhaustion. She sat down opposite me without a word. I pushed the envelope across the table. Her name was not on it. "This is a goodwill severance package," I said, my voice even. "The board has approved it, contingent on your immediate signature." Her hands trembled as she opened the clasp. She pulled out the 3 sheets of paper inside. Her lawyer had likely prepared her for this, but the reality of the document was a physical blow. I watched her scan the key clauses, her eyes darting across the page. Resignation from the board and all positions at Northbridge, effective immediately, full restitution of the $2.4 million to be paid from her vested stock options, a permanent non-disclosure and non-interference agreement, barring her from ever contacting employees or commenting publicly on the company's affairs. In exchange, the final clause offered a single, crucial concession. Should the funds be fully recovered, the company would not pursue a criminal referral to the district attorney's office. She let the papers fall to the table, a soft, defeated sound. She looked up at me, her eyes finally focusing on mine. There was no hatred left, only a profound, soul-deep bitterness. "You won," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "This isn't a game. You didn't lose to me. You lost to a clock. You lost at 3:17 p.m. yesterday. Everything since then has just been paperwork." A single tear traced a path through her expensive foundation. She picked up the pen that lay beside the documents. Her signature was a spidery, broken thing. Nothing like the confident, arrogant flourish she used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts. She pushed the papers back toward me. "It's done," she said. I reviewed the signature, then nodded. "As a courtesy, you have 10 minutes to gather your personal effects from your office. Officer Jennings will escort you. Your other belongings will be professionally packed and couriered to your home." She didn't argue. She stood, her shoulders slumped, and walked to the door. I did not watch her go. Instead, I used my phone to send a single, pre-written text to the head of security: "Execute." Her walk from the elevator to her former office and back again was a walk through a company that had already erased her. As she crossed the grand lobby, the same space where she had sealed her fate, the massive video screens were not dark. They were displaying the new schedule for mandatory employee training. The first and only session listed for the week was a new module. It was titled Lesson 317, De-escalation and Accountability. Her act of violence had been officially stripped of its personal meaning and turned into a corporate teaching moment. Her legacy was a line item in a safety seminar. When she reached the main revolving doors, the security guard did not wait for her to approach. He moved crisply to the side door, holding it open for her. It had started to rain, a miserable gray drizzle that matched the sky. She stepped out, fumbling with a small black umbrella. As she tried to open it, a sudden gust of wind caught it, turning it inside out with a pathetic snap of metal spokes. She struggled with the mangled fabric for a moment before giving up, simply pulling up her collar and walking out into the rain, a small, defeated figure shrinking in the distance. I wasn't in the lobby to see it. I was in my office on the 14th floor, watching the rain streak down the glass. I had not looked down. I had no interest in her final, pathetic moments. The case was closed. The file was complete. My desk phone rang. I picked it up on the first ring. It was the head of our supply chain logistics team. "Ready when you are, Mara." "Begin the cleanup," I said. "Contact the legal teams for Apex, Zenith, and Pinnacle. Inform them their contracts are terminated for breach of terms. Start clawback proceedings. I want a full report by end of day." I hung up. Outside my office, the sounds of the company continued unabated. The distant hum of the servers, the soft ringing of phones, the murmur of voices discussing freight schedules and fuel prices. There were no cheers. There were no celebratory gatherings. No one came to congratulate me. The machine had ejected a faulty part, and now everyone was simply getting back to work. I turned to my computer, opened a file detailing shipping forecasts for the next quarter, and began. The glass room was empty now, a silent theater after the final act. I stood alone in the center, the city lights of Grayford a-glittering, indifferent tapestry beyond the windows. The long obsidian table reflected the ceiling lights like a dark, still lake. On its surface, the evidence of the coup was sparse and mundane: a few water glasses, a discarded pen, and the silver box that had started it all. My work was not quite finished. There was one final piece of protocol to observe. I walked over to the security station where Marcus had left the evidence kit. From it, I took the sealed, tamper-proof bag containing the napkin I had pressed to my bleeding lip. It felt like a lifetime ago. The blood had dried to a dark, rust brown, a meaningless stain on a piece of paper. But it was Exhibit A, the catalyst, the physical proof of the breach that had unlocked everything else. I placed it carefully inside a large evidence envelope, folded the heavy flap, and pressed down firmly on the adhesive seal. I ran my thumb along the seam, ensuring it was closed. There was no ceremony to it, just the quiet finality of closing a case file. I walked back to the head of the table, to the place where Renee had sat. The half-eaten anniversary cake was there, a monument to a celebration that never happened. Slices had been carved from one side, but the rest was a sugary ruin of collapsing frosting and abandoned silver candles. The flames were long dead. A single, impossibly thin tendril of white smoke rose from one of the wicks, a ghost of a wish, a final, fading punctuation mark on the day's events. It hung in the still air for a moment before dissolving into nothing. I sat down, not in the chairwoman's seat, but in my own. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face in the dim room. I bypassed the news alerts, the congratulatory emails that I knew were already flooding my inbox. I opened the simple, text-based application I used to log my daily operational tasks. The cursor blinked on a new line, waiting. My fingers moved over the keyboard. I didn't write an entry about the board meeting, or the suspension, or the look on Renee's face. I typed 3 words, the highest praise one can give in the world of logistics, the only summary that mattered. On time? Delivered. A soft chime emanated from the laptop's speakers. A new email had arrived. The sender was Margaret, the board secretary. The subject line was a simple status update. EOD confirmation. The body was even more concise. A bulleted list of facts. Acting chair installed. Voting rights protocols updated. M&C audit team has been engaged and is on site. System secure. It was the machine confirming that the new software was running correctly. It was the quiet, boring, and beautiful sound of a system that worked. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room returned, deeper this time. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer and my fingers found a small, cool piece of metal. It was a key. It was old, made of worn brass, the teeth smooth from years of use. It was the key to my father's first office, a tiny, rented room above a tire shop, a place he kept long after he'd built this glass tower. It unlocked nothing in this building. It was useless here. He gave it to me the day I was promoted to regional manager. Don't ever forget, he'd said, what it feels like to have to unlock your own door in the morning. I took a simple, thin silver chain from my other pocket and carefully threaded the key onto it, fastening the clasp. It wasn't a crown, it wasn't a scepter, or a symbol of my new, unspoken authority. It was a habit, a reminder, a piece of the engine room to keep with me in the clean, cold air of the executive suite. My phone vibrated on the table, a text message from Delia. Happy belated birthday, Mara. I hope you got what you wanted. My thumbs moved across the screen. My reply was short, and to me, perfectly accurate. On time. I stood up and walked toward the heavy oak doors of the boardroom. My work here was done. As I pulled the door shut, the last thing I saw was the screen on the far wall. The meeting's presentation had been closed, and the room's default screensaver had appeared. It was a simple, elegant slide with the Northbridge logo. Underneath, in the company's official font, was a single line of text. It was the new corporate mantra I had chosen weeks ago. Waiting to be deployed. Safety is a promise, not a speech. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing for a moment in the empty hallway. There were no fireworks painting the night sky. There was no victory speech to be given. There was no triumphant music swelling in the background. There was only the quiet, steady hum of a massive company operating as it should, the silent thrum of 1,000 trucks moving through the darkness, on time, delivering. The gift in the silver box was not for the board. It was a mechanism. The only real gift I had prepared for my stepmother, the one I had spent 5 years wrapping, was the one she had just received. It was the quiet, unimpeded opening of the front door, leading out into the rain. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'm always curious to know where my stories are heard. Please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Mara's revenge and how she handled it. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. It really helps get the story out to more listeners, and if you want to give it an extra boost, hitting that hype button makes a huge difference and ensures more people can hear this story.